I would like to invite all the speakers back, and let's talk about the first question that Shankar just triggered in my mind. In my opening remarks, I talked about centers being a longitudinal platform for advancing important research towards a vision. It impacts how we prepare students, et cetera. But Shankar just made me think about how to really develop partnerships for a lifetime. That 10-year period is probably required. And all of you talked about partnerships with industry, with government, et cetera. So Shankar, did you want to elaborate more about partnerships?
I think so. I think, it is not to be underestimated that when NSF, especially NSF, there are very other few places in the government that have the patience to continue funding for 10, 11 years. At DARPA, we are hard pressed to keep things for more than 3 years. I say this with some affection for DARPA since I worked there, but what happens in 10 years is you have a chance to really see the same people year after year and follow them in their ups and downs and your own ups and downs. And what happens in the case of, we talk about public-private partnerships, but for us, what happened was a lot of private philanthropy picked up on these partnerships. So it was interesting that the government acted as the venture capitalist, funding the riskiest research. And then the private foundations picked up after they'd been de-risked for some time. So in that role, and I know Kurt Carlson's in your committee, Kurt always talked about how it was that, the center money, ERCs, SDCs is so precious because, it enables people to come in behind you and continue to invest in these programs. So, and it really does need these 10 years. If you just do 3 years, even 5, it's just not long enough.
Great point. Anyone else want to add to those comments? Veena?
Yeah, I was just going to say that 10 years also gives you enough time to take your test beds and get some data on them with your demonstrations so that you can build on those partnerships. Because sometimes the test beds you build are not mature enough, don't have enough of a high TRL level to give over to the hands of somebody else. So you need that initial time to incubate and mature them so that you can capitalize on the investment made in those early test beds.
Yeah, and this is Mark. I would like to add that by definition, the overarching vision is so transformative that it does take that much time. You're often starting with very little, and you're trying to get something going that's truly transformative. So 10 years really goes by very, very fast.
Yeah, I would like to add that the integration and the collaboration is not just on the technology, is also on our students and the workforce. And in fact, many industry partners tells us the most valuable thing they got from us as researchers is our students, because the students naturally transfer all these technology to industry. So I think this is a very valuable longitudinal or integration, our manpower, our human power.
Yeah, I'd like to just comment. I would just like that the fact that you've built a partnership over 10 years, as you evolve, the partnership evolves. And right now in our current work, we're still working with many of the same people that we worked with in year 2000. And so that's a very powerful, I think, cohesive force that these long programs, these 10-year center-oriented programs will foster.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo or strengthen the previous comment also, that the collaboration that the centers enable between students at different universities and with different faculty and different disciplines is huge, because I know, reflecting when I was a PhD student, we kind of worked under our advisor and it was kind of insulated. But in fact, I was at a meeting yesterday where the Applied Technology Council and FEMA and other groups were there, and many of the speakers there were students who had come through the Peer Center and now are leaders. But they really, by working with each other, it kind of everything amped up. It's incredible. And I think the centers were just key.
Right, and they speak the same language, they understand. Karen, did you want to add to that? I see you nodding over there.
So I guess I'm like the baby center, you know, the baby center of all the ERCs. But yeah, I think, you know, that you said that the last comment about the sense of belonging, you know, to a center. Yeah, that's amazing. That has been just very important to all of our students. Feeling that they belong and they speak that language, and all of them are going towards the same goal, and, you know, through different paths, and it's just very important.
Okay, so go ahead,
Teresa, just to add on to one other thing, you know, in our center, you know, we had a huge policy footprint because, you know, these were influencing people's lives. And, you know, I think we all would, you know, I think in engineering, you know, what has really changed is we are so intermixed in everyday systems. And Conwell said, you know, right from the beginning, we're interested in changing societal systems. And so the issue about societal systems is they're the slowest to change. You know, the technology changes reasonably rapidly. Startups happen fast. Industry takes up research fast. But I think having time, you know, you saw a picture of Janet, you know, Napolitano. It took us 3 years to really convince her in DHS that chem-bio-nuclear was not the biggest threat. Well, it is a big threat, so don't get me wrong, but it's certainly IT threats. And what we should do in terms of forensics and Secret Service, you know, we engaged with district attorneys in Los Angeles and the FTC and the FCC. You know, this takes time. And to bring in those elements, you know, the Stanford Law School was huge, you know, but it took us 2.5 years to get the Stanford Law School to, and they worked with Deirdre Mulligan to have these reporting laws in 36 states. You know, that's what it takes to get legislation done. It takes 5 years, you know, to get it done. So having the center as a stable piece to actually affect societal change, you know, I think is huge. And you know, Greg was talking about earthquakes and codes and all of that. You know, I think it's impossible to get all those changed without some time to really lean on and now coming back to our former boss, Teresa and Janet, you know, she has said consistently that it's more than policy, because we have to convince the politicians to, as the leaders, to really internalize what is being done and how it should change society. And so this opportunity to really engage with our leaders has been huge, and it really mattered to me and to us in this center.
Okay, Shankar, I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce Larry. Would you like to introduce Larry? He's on, the screen.
Okay, so Larry is the one that actually did all the work. He is executive director. He came like me from DARPA, and he has a lifetime's experience with all kinds of agencies. Larry, are you on the?
I'm here. Yeah, Shankar.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything to this part of the conversation, Larry?
No, I think.
Talk about House of Lords, and you're testifying to House of Lords and all of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess just to echo what everybody's saying, I think this sort of center model was very, very beneficial in tackling this sort of ambitious agenda that we put together for trust. And so certainly some sustained support of it was you know, very much welcome in terms of doing what we did. And we wouldn't have been as successful if we had, you know, 3 to 5 years to do this. As Shankar said, we would have just been ramping up at that point. So I do think there's value in this continued sustained support of initiatives like we've heard about today.
Yeah, and I think those part.
Larry testified to the House of Lords to create a mirror center. I thought you'd talk about this and his moment of glory there with all the lords that. So there's a copy of Trust in Belfast, in Northern Ireland. And there's a copy of Trust, in addition to Taiwan and the Philippines, also in Italy, which, so Larry played a huge role in international partnerships.
And we'll talk about international in a minute because you all have triggered that as well. But I'd like to take this conversation, and we've touched on what I'm about to ask, to point to Michael's presentation when he pointed out that just on his own census ERC team, they talked about the word boundary and what do we really mean by the definition of surface. And so, especially when we work in interdisciplinary teams, the most fundamental words that we take for granted every day actually have different interpretations to different groups. And Mark, you're in the MD engineering space. You probably confronted that as well. So Michael, would you like to kick off a conversation about the importance of words? All of you have touched on this question and how you get through that hurdle in building interdisciplinary teams to meet that 10-year vision.
Well, you know, Teresa, it's very interesting because, you know, when people ask me, what do I do? I say, I herd cats. And they say, what, you're a veterinarian? I said, no. You know, these academics have egos and we have lots of scratch marks on our hands and everything. And I think a hallmark of a good director is how many times you actually have to put your foot down and plant a stake in the ground and say, this is it, you know, this is a decision. Even though your partners may fuss at it. And the word subsurface was a good case in point. You know, it was an epiphany for me as we were thinking about the name of the center and what distinguishes what we were doing from what others would be doing in sort of inverse problems, okay? You know, how do you understand the source of something from the data that you see from, you know, the signals that it emits or you force it to emit. And, you know, I really said, look, subsurface really describes what we want to do. We want to distinguish what we can see from what we can't see and how, you know, we can develop common tools. And I got a lot of pushback, especially from the civil engineers that were on the team that said, Michael, no, subsurface is the ground. It's beneath the surface. And so again, you know, with all the cats there, I put my foot down. I think I've had to do this maybe 3 times in the course of the center. That was one of them, defining what we meant by subsurface. The other one that I really remember was at a retreat that we had, a yearly retreat. And, you know, we were working very hard at the fundamental science level, and we had these experimental laboratory facilities. And, you know, after really thinking through what was missing, I really understood that what we needed were test beds at the system level, not at the enabling technology level, but at the system level. You know, combating in vitro fertilization. How do we understand what would be needed for an egg to evolve into a viable embryo, and so on and so forth. So I stood up at the retreat and said, starting in the next few months, these are the systems we're going to work on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got tremendous pushback on that. But in the end, that's what really made our center a powerful vehicle, the system level test beds. So, you know, when you mentioned the language, Teresa, that brought this other example to mind, because what the center director has to do is really think above, you know, the noise and come to some, you know, seminal wisdom every once in a while, not every day, not every year, but every once in a while, and guide the course of the center in a way that is really significant. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, it does. Anyone else want to touch upon the importance of words and how to crack that nut within your center as you try to build your teams? And with your partnerships as well. Mark.
Well, I'm happy to do this. One of the things that I found was very, very key, and it seems so obvious and almost too simple, is to develop a common dictionary of terms. We found very early on that there were just two different languages being spoken, and to really sit down and develop a glossary of terms, we made a very conscious effort at every meeting to develop that and make that available to all the faculty and students, and obviously industrial partners. It was really key so we could all start to speak the same words and understand them as such. So it seems so simple, but I struggled because I just realized that what the word I was using and how I understood it wasn't how it was being understood by others. And so creating a common language in which we clearly define what words mean and make it available, almost like a dictionary for our ERC, was very critical.
I want to add something, Teresa.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so, by words, I think everybody and NSF and all the centers, there's very clear that they all want diversity, inclusion, and all of that. But it's very different when you see it from a different perspective, that when you're at the forefront and you understand fully what's needed. Being at the forefront is a lot different than, looking at, okay, well, let me just add one number and let me try to recruit. But being immersed completely and living and seeing, on a daily basis the situation, that brings a totally different perspective. And there's a lot that you might have to sacrifice. I think in my personal situation, I was asked many times to leave. It's like, you're going to burn out, don't stay there. You might have much better opportunities somewhere else, potentially, yes. But leading that forefront and seeing the change is just, it just gives you a totally different dimension to the potential that can be made. And I think this opportunity of, I guess right now what you're talking about words is very different to just read it as to actually live it, right? So I think it's we have had a great opportunity and this opportunity right now to present, that what we have been doing from the workforce development and how we're impacting your centers, because we are actually the ones that are preparing the students to apply to graduate school. And I guess without us, then you cannot really have, diversity, right? And because the students will either not graduate or will not look into graduate school. So we are living a different perspective. But we might interpret the words differently, right? That diversity and inclusion. But I think thank you so much for this opportunity, and I certainly our students appreciate that because it will open more opportunities to them.
So I want to echo what has been talked about and about words, also about what Shankar said. In fact, one of the major challenges when we work together as a convergent team is the culture. And sometimes words is because you come from a different culture, you interpret it very differently. And some people ask me in many aspects, what is the most challenging thing working together on technology or on diversity, equity, inclusion? My bottom line answer is culture. Sometimes you need to break the culture. Sometimes you need to advance the culture. That's the hardest thing. And that's one thing that ERC is doing well, because ERC has long-term, and many of these objectives is to advance the culture, is to change the culture. So that's what I want to relate to that.
Great comments. And these comments here actually segue me to another question, which I'm going to point to Karen first, because a question came in the chat from the audience that I wanted to ask you anyway, or highlight, and gets into the culture and your environment and immersion. You have a Prem Grant, which it's funded for those of you not familiar with Partnerships for Research and Education and Materials. It's funded out of the Division of Materials Research from MPS. But the requirement is for the lead institution to be a minority serving institution partnered with an R1. And so I'm a personal fan of this model and like to see it adopted across NSF, but it's really something to look at, in the ERC context. So, and as Karen knows, I've lived at the border, and I used to be at UT Rio Grande Valley, and my last stint was at the University of Texas at El Paso as Dean of Engineering. And I bring this up because I am immersed in that culture. I'm Mexican American. My parents were born and raised at the border. And I had a mission to advance my ethnicity in engineering. But UT El Paso is part of an ERC with Rice and others. And I encourage the NSF site visit team to do a site visit at El Paso. It's one thing to say that you're at the border, Karen, but it's another to actually be there and for a few days and see what's happening. So, Conwell, to your point, to understand the culture and get immersed is I invite all of you to think about that. So Karen, you want to talk about the Prem Grant and how that may have built capacity, and also speak about I know UTRGV is partnering with SpaceX. They just completed a launch site down at Boca Chica Beach, adjacent to Brownsville. Would you like to comment about the Prem Grant, capacity building at your institution, and partnerships with companies such as SpaceX?
Yes, certainly. So about the Prem Grant, usually we're seen as a minority serving institution. Okay, yeah, we'll give you 100K here or 400K here, and then you just have to struggle one grant and another grant and another grant. So you waste a lot of precious time, to actually hands-on work with the students and mentor and do everything that is needed, to move and change the culture and change the community. So Prem was basically the first grant that gave us $3 million. Okay, so it was like, okay, now we can do something. So it was $3 million for 5 years. And then the next round was like, again, $3 million for 6 years. And then now we got $4.2 million for 6 years again. So it's not enough, I think, to really change the community and really make a huge impact. But in reality, it is enough, or it's the perfect platform. And as said in the presentation, we have touched, 500 lives, of the students. We have worked one-on-one with the students. The students become totally attached to you. As I said, students graduate, and 10 years later, 15 years later, they come back, and some of them right after, and they want you to be part of their dissertation committee. So we've worked with other institutions through that. It's just, it just changed the community completely. So I guess investment in this area, as you said, where annual family incomes are $30,000, investments are humongous, and it's the best return on investment for NSF. As I said, we bring, with the ones that have graduated from our team, we give like about $8 million to the nation in taxes, right? So a year. So it is amazing, the return on investment at NSF. I don't think anybody can top it. But and the number of 90 plus undergraduates are Hispanics. We have our masters, 70 plus are Hispanics. So it's U.S. citizens or permanent residents. So yeah, the Prem has been a tremendous help to change the culture and the community at large. As for SpaceX, we are right now, people are getting to know where we are because the SpaceX came here, right? So now it's like, oh yeah, where SpaceX is, right? So yeah, it's been a tremendous excitement for the students, those that type of industry that moves into the area. Students that I want to work there, and then it brings excitement, it brings the opportunities. The students that might not have gotten an opportunity right now, I have a couple of them that apply, they didn't get an opportunity, and it's like, okay, I'm enrolling for my master's program, I'm staying here, I'm doing my best because I want to work there. So those are the type of motivation, right, that keeps the students going. And of course, we have to be very careful how we partner with the students and with industry, so we can keep them motivated and use them as, to open the pathway and increase that pipeline for graduate degrees and success of our students.
Very nice. Thank you, Karen. And Shankar, you mentioned Ann Gates at UT El Paso in your remarks.
Yeah. So can I just sort of echo what you said? I put in sort of my, just as a realignment of global supply chains, there's a huge amount of engineering manufacturing on the other side of the border from of the Rio Grande. And, so I think there is a huge economic imperative to support what you're saying. I'm on the boards of 2-3 companies, and the amount of realignment of the manufacturing, not certainly there, but also, it's not just across the Rio Grande, but even further west. And so I think this notion of having centers of excellence and having, especially engineering expertise close to the Mexican border, I think is really part of an industrial imperative. And I would fully support, what you said about sort of acculturating faculty who just really don't understand. It's a little too personal, but I'm on the board of Lexmark, and Lexmark has moved all its manufacturing out of Asia onto the other side of Ciudad Juarez and further south. And so, to me, I think having an understanding of what could be done across the border, I think is an idea whose time has certainly come. And I'd encourage NSF to think about U.S.-Mexico partnerships in that lens. And so anyhow, this is probably not ERC, but I think as a social imperative.
But as Karen pointed out, we're talking about words a minute ago, and it's the diversity and inclusion, and how do we understand those words? So yeah, it does relate. Thank you, Shankar.
And Elon Musk has gone to Boca Chica, but maybe others will come along.
Oh yeah, he's absolutely down there. And Michael, I just love your 3-plane chart approach to how do we do systemic change in broadening participation, because as you and I know, we've talked about this. I know you've had an impact in the state of Massachusetts in the K through 12 realm. Beautiful idea. I share that with you. I was so happy when you mentioned it. Could you talk a little bit more about looking at it from a systems point of view and how we try to impact engineering culture and culture at large to really authentically engage a broader community in what we're trying to do?
Well, Teresa, it was a significant challenge. Philosophically, I really felt that the 3-plane approach could be applied to non-engineering challenges. And, in deciding to go after the NSF Includes Alliance Award, which is really, it's the ERC equivalent, I believe, in the diversity, equity, and inclusion effort, because the Includes program was one of the big ideas that NSF decided to invest in. And the alliances were kind of the flagship program of that Includes effort. But there was nothing in engineering. When I looked at the alliances that had been formed, they were really at the grassroots level, I think, most of them. And when I was trying to think about what would be the systemic impact of an Includes Alliance in engineering, and I happened to connect with Carl Reed, who at the time was the CEO of the National Society for Black Engineers. And they had created an entity called the 50K Coalition, which had the goal of 50,000 bachelor's degree candidates by 2025. I said, that's beginning to get at it, but it's not aggressive enough. And I said, what if we thought about 100,000? And would that effectively end up moving the needle for broad participation in a significant way? And the question is, well, what would it take to reach 100,000 graduates, BS graduates, and then 30,000 masters and PhDs for women and underrepresented minorities? And it really required not working with the individual students so much as institutional change. It really related to how do you create systemic change at the institutions that are producing these degree graduates. And so with that as the, sort of the driving force at the system level, we then went through what are the barriers that prevent institutions from changing? And how do we create the research program and the technology, if you will, the analog of the enabling technology? And that's what led us to formulate the three-level approach. It's a dynamically evolving three-level approach, because it isn't as quantifiable as the engineering systems approach from the technology end. But it was enough to bring together diverse partners. And, we presented this to the NSF reviewers. And, again, we were a dark horse. You normally could go for the Alliance grant by first getting a planning grant. I said, we don't have time for a planning grant. Let's just figure out what to do and put our best foot forward. And NSF really liked our proposal. They really liked it. And now, be careful what you wish for, because this is not easy. This is not easy. And we're finding that out where, the strategic plan is evolving, but it's a worthwhile goal. It's a labor of love for me. Not so much a labor of love, but a labor of necessity. Our grandchildren have got to live in a country that represents the people in this country. And that's the diverse population that makes up the strength of this country. So it was that motivation that really, guided me to put together this proposal that actually won. And as I say, now the challenge is we have to make it real. But, we're getting a lot of attention, and, we're working with industry. We're taking a lot of knowledge from the ERC program, industrial memberships, sustainability. So the key is, systemic, transformative, and sustainable change. So that's a long answer to your short.
Thank you. And we have about 3 minutes left, and I have so many questions. Let me pivot to Larry and possibly Vina. But Larry, I know you've probably had to look at, inherent biases that may emerge in AI and machine learning security. Can you comment about that to tie it to this theme of the conversation?
Yeah, sure. And that, I think that's something that to build on what Michael said, I think one of the benefits and what we did on Trust is sort of approach it in this interdisciplinary way. So not just thinking about the software and sort of from a computer science standpoint, but we brought in social scientists, we brought in policy experts, we brought in law people, as Shankar said. I mean, some of the more innovative and impactful results of the center came from people who were, say, a student who was got a joint PhD in computer science and a JD from the law school in the same school. And so they brought a real unique perspective to addressing some of these problems. And so that was something that was very kind of interesting to see evolve from during the life of the center, to have people, for example, lawyers and computer scientists working together. That's, to the conversation earlier, spoke very different languages about how they approach things. Even sort of doing joint publications was challenging, because how you submit to a law journal is very different than how you submit to a computer science journal. So there was just some things like that. But over time, and again, having the benefit of a multi-year investment by NSF, we enabled a lot of that. And now I think that interdisciplinary research, at least on the Berkeley campus, is much more common. But 10 years ago, it was much less so. So.
Totally agree. Thank you. And Veena, I don't know if you wanted to add to that. You mentioned this challenge as well in your work.
I could say that, let me maybe give you an example of the diversity challenges that we face and the whole idea of the pipeline that ERCs enable. We actually saw that in action and it works. We have young scholars coming from high school from underrepresented groups. They come into the center, they are exposed, they want to apply to engineering. They come to engineering as an undergraduate student and then they get excited and they go to grad school. And it could be in different universities, not even connected with the center, but the fact that we're able to excite them at that young age through the ERC platform and through the test beds in which they can connect, they can see the impact. A lot of times students want to see the impact of what they're going to be doing more than just how fast a computer would be or how fast a car would be. So it really does work. And we've used that as much as we can across the center.
Great, thank you.
But Teresa, if I can jump in a little bit about I think in these centers, we are successful with the students, but an area that I think is really critical is about hiring more faculty of color to our faculties. And let me say that in the chaos of our university, and I was a dean when I was the PI, so I had the full. I think it's hard to translate the needs of ERCs and STCs and the participation requirements of those to hiring more faculty of color. And I had to do it by fiat, not by saying that the STC needed it. However, I do think that NSF can help because I saw a pilot program in an unrelated area of NSF where NSF wanted to spur universities in this country to hire more people in quantum computing. That's the program I saw. And they offered an incentive scheme to hire young faculty. And I think the incentive was the first 4 years salary or some fraction of the first 3-4 years salary or something like that. And, to a cash-strapped state school, it's like manna. Being the University of California, which we belong to, so and NC State perhaps too. So I know that your dean's on this committee, so I'm addressing it to him. But I do think that it could be. I think for these centers, if there was a supplementary program, I think nothing's more powerful for your underrepresented enrollment. And role models, they're important. And the best way to get a role model is to hire them to your faculty. I mean, it's so I think if there was this kind of supplementary support to do that attached to these centers, I think that I feel that would help. And I'm delighted that Michael's doing the includes, but includes is a whole other ecosystem, as he pointed out. Whereas I think the idea of attaching it, maybe as a supplementary competition to the centers, it would be powerful to me.
Yeah, we're talking about sustainable models, and we are at time. Greg, did you want to make any final comment? I see Mark is still here. Conwell.
Teresa, just one quick comment to Shastri. It's not so much that universities would love to hire faculty of color, but there just aren't enough. And the real question is, how do you increase the numbers of graduates that can ultimately become faculty?
No question. The pipeline is important too, but I think that it really helps the centers to have more faculty of color on the research staff, and that timetable you can't wait for the pipeline to build up for that.
I think we can have another NAE meeting just on this.
There you partner with MSIs. If you partner with MSIs and do it meaningfully, that's
yes.
part of the solution, perhaps.
Correct. Greg, Mark, any final?
Just wanted to express a thanks for organizing this. It was really, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Being busy.
Sounds like a low bar, Greg.
And Michael, I was, the Peer Center was active when your Subsurface Center was active, and it was really delightful to think back to Lynn Preston's imprint on us when that 3-plane chart was kind of a new thing that we didn't get it. We had to hear it about 3 or 4 times, and then it clicked and made sense. And so it was really nice.
I think that happened to every center director I've met. And with that, I'd like to have this session in honor of Lynn Preston.
Oh,
yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you all. I loved the conversation. Thank you. Dan, may I turn it to you?
Get off mute here. Thank you. Gosh, what a great panel and wonderful conversation, and precisely and I think we did exceed expectations. So I do believe that was nicely done, folks. Great conversation. Obviously provocative. A lot of good things that we can talk about future. So let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back with the afternoon session. I think in about we only have like 15 minutes or so, so it won't be much, but we're happy to have back, and I think Louis Martin Vega will be our moderator on the next one. Thank you, Teresa, for your wonderful moderation of that last panel. So thank you much. We'll see you all after the break. All right.
Thank you.